This is a Wisconsin Sports Zone update.
Well, the Wisconsin football team season this fall going to open a couple days early. The school announced this morning that its season opener against Miami of Ohio going to take place on Thursday, August 28th. It'll be the seventh time in the last 9 seasons the Badgers will open at night. This time will come with a new offensive coordinator in Jeff Grimes. He comes from Kansas, plans to install more of a power run game that fans will perhaps recognize after 2 years running the air raid under former OC Phil Longo. It's a welcome change for quarterbacks coach Kenny Guyton, who was the wide receivers coach last year.
With any staff that you're on, when you feel like, hey, maybe you can't speak up as much, it's just not the same, and not saying anything bad about the past or anything here, because I know we're moving forward and we got to acknowledge what's happened in the past, but at the end of the day, I think we have, and I think moving in the right direction in order to take this offense, this team, to the next step and where we all see it reaching. And
Wisconsin will open spring practice a week from tomorrow. They will hold their pro day coming up this Friday. Meanwhile, Packers re-upped one of their own free agents yesterday by agreeing to a 3-year deal with kicker Brandon McManus. He went 20 for 21 after being signed in October last year, including a pair of game winners.
Rural Mutual Insurance, keeping Wisconsin strong.
You're grateful for all the ways technology can connect us. Unfortunately, there are online scammers who want to take advantage. Malicious viruses, phishing scams, and identity theft are more prevalent than ever. That's why Rural Mutual includes cybersecurity protection as an option on every policy.
Rural Mutual Insurance, keeping Wisconsin strong.
Well, the Badgers will look to make it 8 in a row over Minnesota tonight when they face the Gophers in the Twin Cities. No one on the current team has ever lost to Minnesota. Badgers are looking to earn a double bye in the Big Ten tournament next week. And the Bucs are going to play the second game of a back-to-back tonight against Dallas at home. With this Wisconsin Sports Zone Network update, I'm Zach Heil.
That's right, another situation that has been bubbling for the last several weeks. DK Metcalf, as colleague Tom Pelissero and I reported this morning, has requested a trade from Seattle. He had a meeting this morning with Seattle brass, discussed the trade request. The team has acknowledged it and essentially said, you are allowed to explore it, and they will do some exploring as well. It is not a great free agent class at the receiver position. It is not a great receiver class in the draft. Players like DK Metcalf, I would say similar to Deebo Samuel, when they become available and there's just not a lot of other players where teams can improve upon their roster with, these guys become coveted. I expect there to be significant interest in DK Metcalf. We'll see if Seattle gets enough interest to do a trade. This is really one of the best receivers in the NFL. The fact that he's become available, I can assure you, teams have noticed.
We need to continue to ramp up our sense of urgency. The life of a player in the National Football League is not very long. We got a bunch of good guys in that locker room. We got a bunch of talented guys in that locker room. And I think it's time that we start competing for championships, right?
This is where Wisconsin gathers to talk sports. Packers, Brewers, Badgers, Bucks. The Wisco Sports Show is on the air. Now, here's your host, Grant Bills.
Brian Gutekunst never should have made that comment at his end of the year presser, because I am just going to continue to play it and reference it and use it to hold his feet to the fire, at least on the show, right? I know Brian Gutekunst is not like, I'm getting killed on, mid-market sports talk radio. I better make a trade. But I'm going to continue to reference that comment that he made. He made it unprompted. And I talked about it. I specifically remember the discussion we had at the Super Bowl with Aaron Nagler about that comment. He's like, yeah, Brian Gutekunst wouldn't just say that to placate fans. And that comment wasn't teed up by a question or a prompt. He just came out and said it. So pardon me if I view this entire offseason and any potential moves or trades or signings through that lens, especially when a player like DK Metcalf now has officially requested a trade. We talked about the Packers potentially pursuing him on Friday when there was some reporting that, maybe Green Bay and Seattle had some level of conversation about it at the Combine. The official or non-official nature of that conversation, that was debated a little bit by reporters, and we'll kind of recap that here in a sec. But there was some smoke last Friday, and today we were made aware of the fire. DK Metcalf and Seattle have been going back and forth for a bit, and today he officially requests a trade. So that's where I want to begin. This is the Wisco Sports Show. My name is Grant Bills. I hope you've had an excellent day. I got a text from my mom, or maybe it was from my dad, that we have a family group chat. And I got a picture of their yard this morning. Holy balls. So if you're listening on Sports Talk 105.1 up in Eau Claire, you might still be buried. I don't know. That looked like a miserable way to wake up. It was only raining down here in the southern portion of the state until about lunchtime today when it snowed and like just got really windy. And now everything's like caked in a layer of ice. I had to go to Quick Trip. I didn't have to. I wanted to go to Quick Trip before the show to get something to drink. And honestly, sometimes I just go to Quick Trip because I'm like, I need to get out of this padded room for 15 minutes in the middle of my workday. I need to stretch my legs. And I chipped so much ice off my. So I hope that you're not dealing with that. I know some listeners in maybe the northern portion of the state up towards Eau Claire. That's not up north, but it's relatively northern. I hope you're enjoying your day. 2 guests tonight. Both are outstanding. The gold standard even of Wisconsin sports journalism for their respective teams and their respective beats. Jesse Temple, it's Wednesday. He's going to join us in the 5 o'clock hour to talk a little Wisconsin basketball there in Minnesota tonight. They're much better than the Gophers, and Wisconsin, they've beaten the Gophers the last few years when they have matched up. But the last couple times they played up at the barn, Minnesota has at least given them a great game. Wisconsin stole a couple they probably didn't deserve to win, and they've hung on to win by the skin of their teeth. Their average margin of victory up there recently has been really, really low. So we'll talk about that game with Jesse, including some interesting football tidbits. And you know me, I'm not going to force college football talk if there's not college football talk to be had, but a couple of interesting things that Jesse's written about in spring practices are starting pretty quickly here in the next few weeks. So we'll talk with Jesse in hour number 2. And at 4:30, in about 20 minutes, we will have J.R. Radcliffe. Dale Jorgensen has decided, he didn't really consult me, he's decided that he's moving his report to tomorrow. He sent me a very strongly worded email. Maybe I'll read that to you before the end of the show. But no Dale tonight. We'll get him tomorrow. But 2 guests, both J.R. Radcliffe and Jesse Temple. Just really, really good. Really, really lucky to have them both tonight's show. Plus, I'm a little tired. I've been doing the last hour of the morning show with Zach. It's not manual labor, don't get me wrong, but I don't mind the guest contributors. I don't mind a little help. So I'm excited to have both Jesse and JR tonight. The Jays. But I want to start with DK Metcalf. Let's just get into it. I'm wasting time. So back on Friday, we learned from a Seahawks podcaster, Seattle media member, and I can't remember his name, but I'll look it up when I have a second here to make sure that we have the name and the source correct if you want to go find it. We basically were out a report that DK Metcalf and Seattle might not be a perfect match moving forward. Seattle's got some salary cap issues. Maybe they're looking to move some guys. And a team to watch, the Packers. Because John Schneider, Brian Gutekunst, they used to work together. And it was reported last week that there was some sort of conversation or some sort of discussion where a trade was discussed. Terms were perhaps discussed. And then the Packers, through Matt Schneidman, kind of came out and said, whoa. We didn't make an official offer now. Stop that. And I'm like, well, I believe that the Packers, like, they didn't put a binder together. Like, hey, here's Romeo Doubs and a pick. Peruse this and sign if you're good. Like, maybe it wasn't official, but I don't doubt for a sec over the combine in some dark hallway or some well-lit hallway. Maybe, I don't know, in the back booth of a steakhouse, maybe St. Elmo's. I know that's where everyone goes. I don't doubt for a second that Brian Gutekunst or someone from the Packers talked to someone from the Seahawks because there was just too much smoke. There were too many little reports, even if they were kind of scattered and not super official. Well, today we get the official news that DK Metcalf has requested a trade. Now, I'll admit, and I'll be 100% upfront, that when I talk about this, I'm a Packers fan and owner, so I'm talking about this potential trade or this potential acquisition through a Packers lens, okay? I will lay my green and gold bias on the table. I'm well aware. So I'm wish casting a little bit when I talk about this situation, 100%. But like I explained on Friday, and I don't think this is bias, this would be an outstanding fit for so many reasons. If the Packers were to trade kind of what was rumored and what was reported last week, which would be a wide receiver and a pick, which I think Romeo Doubs is the obvious name, and then whatever the pick would be. The report last week was Seattle will want a 1. Okay, well, whether it turns out to be a 1 or a 2 or a 3, whatever. Romeo Doubs and a pick. Okay, well, if the Packers ship out Romeo Doubs in this deal, the wide receiving core now is DK Metcalf, Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, Tucker Kraft, of course, a supplement pass catcher at tight end. That works really well. There's no redundancies. No one's stepping on anyone's toes. It's not like, well, those two guys kind of do the same thing. No. Jaden Reed slot, Dontavian Wicks, you're kind of underneath precision route runner. DK Metcalf, take the top off the defense, get downfield, win against man, stretch vertically, right? Perfect. Fits outstanding together, those 3 guys. And I'm not saying that Romeo Doubs is an issue currently in Green Bay. He's not an issue, but you're not really sure what to do with him right now. Just had 2 concussions. He got suspended last year. What's that all about? Even if that's not the end of the world, I still don't really know if a Romeo Doubs extension is a total slam dunk. So if Romeo Doubs goes out in the deal, then that's Seattle's decision to make. You have 2 wide receivers who are a year younger and further removed from extensions in Reed and Wicks. DK Metcalf gets an extension. He's your number 1. Bam. That's such a good fit. I was also watching a clip that Cheesehead TV posted with Justice Mosqueda, who's with Acme Packing. It was him and Nagler talking about this, and Justice made some awesome points about DK Metcalf alone. Forget how he fits with all of the other guys on the roster. DK Metcalf, in and of himself, is a Matt LaFleur type of wide receiver. Big, heavy, thick, can be a force physically in the running game if need be. That's what Matt LaFleur wants, and that's typically what the Packers have drafted the last couple of years. Jaden Reed is a little bit of an outlier, but I think he plays with a certain physicality that is a little bit above his weight class and a little bit above his stature. And I remember talking about that with Mike Renner in the middle of last year, maybe around the first month. He's like, yeah, I question Jaden Reed's size, but when you see how physical he plays, you understand why the Packers were able to look past some of their height weight thresholds to take a player like that. But in this clip, and I suggest you all go watch it, it's Cheesehead TV, Aaron Nagler, Justice Mosqueda. It's like 4 minutes long, right? Justice made the point that you can have one small guy out there. You know what I mean? And last year when Christian Watson got hurt, Bo Melton becomes that small guy. Well, Jaden Reed's not super big either. You now have some size disadvantages on the boundary, and it gets tougher to run the football, right? Not to mention when you lose Christian Watson's deep threat ability, the defense compresses. It gets harder to pass the football too. But DK Metcalf can be a perfect fit with the other wide receivers in the Packers wide receiving room and Tucker Kraft at tight end. He also fits the exact prototype physically of what Matt LaFleur and the Packers are looking at wide receiver. Perfect fit. You really can't get much better. You really can't get much better, okay? I also think, assuming no one goes hog wild, assuming the Browns don't fly out of nowhere to throw 2 first-rounders or 2 firsts and a second, like assuming no one goes absolutely bananas with an offer to Seattle, and assuming everyone's kind of in the same ballpark giving an offer to Seattle to acquire DK Metcalf, I think the Packers are in a pretty good spot to offer compensation that I think John Schneider and the Seahawks would be really interested in. Think about everything that's at play here, okay, in a potential trade for DK Metcalf. Metcalf is departing the Seahawks, so they're losing that receiver. Today, they released Tyler Lockett, who's been, I can't believe he's still there. I feel like I was in middle school when he was drafted. He's been there forever, right? So Seattle is losing 2 of their stanchions at the position. Jackson Smith and Jigba is a really, really solid young player, really, really good, but they're kind of losing a lot around the rest of the room. So Seattle's probably thinking, well, could we get a proven player? You know what I mean? The Packers not only can add draft compensation to their trade offer, any team can do that. They also have, he's still very young on a rookie contract with some team control left. Romeo Doubs, he's a proven thing. He's cut his teeth in this league. He can show up for you day 1 next year, play wide receiver, and help you win. That's not something that a lot of teams around the league could offer. For example, the Patriots. The Patriots have more money than they know what to do with. They have some great draft capital to spend, higher picks than the Packers, sure. I question a little bit the appetite that Robert Kraft has for really going all in. They didn't want to do it for Ayuk. They didn't want to do it for Calvin Ridley. They were outbid by other teams for Calvin Ridley. So I question, for example, the Patriots, another team that would seem to really fit, a team that would have a lot of motivation, big appetite to acquire him. Even if New England jumps in with both feet to offer the requisite draft compensation and they're prepared to extend him, and it would make sense if they would be prepared, it would make sense. They don't have a wide receiver to throw in. It's like, hey, we'll give you a pick and this nice young player. For some teams, that might not matter. I think that matters for Seattle. And I don't know John Schneider personally. I'm not familiar with the way that he does business intimately like I would be with Brian Gutekunst or the Packers. It's not my team. But just watching Seattle as an NFC rival now for the better part of, my entire lifetime, but let's just say the John Schneider era. Let's say Russell Wilson and beyond. Let's draw that line of demarcation and talk about this era of Seahawks football. It's never really been a team that's shown an appetite to rebuild. When they traded away Russ, everyone kind of thought, well, they'll stink, right? They're going to trade away more pieces, they're going to tank, and they're going to start this thing over. And John Schneider's like, no, We're going to bring in Geno Smith, who we like a lot, and we're going to keep this thing going. You know what I mean? I don't gather in Seattle, they have to shed a lot of money and they released a bunch of guys yesterday. I think, was it Roy Robertson Harris? Is that the correct George Fant they released? They released Tyler Lockett today. They got to clear money. But Seattle in the past have been in a situation like this. We got to trade Russell Wilson or we got to cut salary. That has not equaled we are prepared to suck. Right? Seattle has shown over the last couple of years that they don't really want to do a hard reset. They want to keep this thing going. We're going to stay in contention. We're going to stay good. Romeo Doubs can help them do that. And other teams around the NFL who might be interested in DK Metcalf, a lot of those teams don't have a player to offer like Romeo Doubs. I think the Packers are uniquely positioned in a couple of different ways as a perfect suitor for this deal. The fit is incredible. He's exactly what they need. He fits their height, weight measurables. That's why they liked him originally in the draft. They took Elton Jenkins instead, which worked out pretty well. And by the time their pick came up again, DK Metcalf was off the board. It was a player they liked in the first place. So the fit, the measurables, it's all there. I also think the Packers, probably more than most teams in the league, have the right type of compensation. Anyone can offer a draft pick. Can you also give me a player? Like when the Seahawks traded away Russell Wilson, it wasn't just for picks. We want Noah Fant. We want Shelby Harris. I think it was Shelby Harris. Like, we want players too. We're not interested in tanking. We're not interested in sucking and drafting and sucking and drafting. Anybody can throw picks at Seattle for DK Metcalf. What the Packers could do that, say, a team like the Patriots couldn't, and they're dying for talent, they're dying for weapons around Drake May. New England can offer them picks. Can't offer them a player like Romeo Doubs. You know what I mean? And some teams wouldn't be interested in that. They're just like, we want all the picks. We're going to suck and we're going to tank and we're going to rebuild this thing. I don't think Seattle has an appetite for that. I don't think that's what Seattle wants. So the fit is perfect. Green Bay has the perfect war chest of ammo to probably throw together the best offer for DK Metcalf if they want. Oh, yeah, and by the way, their offseason began with Brian Gutekunst saying, it's time to ramp up our sense of urgency and contend for a championship. And then a couple weeks later at the Super Bowl, Josh Jacobs goes on every show in America and says, we need a number one wide receiver. Bullet point after bullet point after bullet point after bullet point as to why this is perfect for Green Bay. Doesn't mean it'll happen, but man, you start to piece through all the details and you start to try to put this thing together. It bodes really well for the Packers, and I'm really interested to see how this progresses. J.R. Radcliffe's going to join us at 4:35. We're going to talk a little Brewers, and we're going to talk about DK Metcalf as well. But I want to break a little early from our first segment to give you an opportunity if you want to join in and talk about this. This is the big story of the day. 608-321-1670 to your calls if you're interested. Next.
This is the Wisco Sports Show with Grant Bills on the Wisconsin Sports Zone Radio Network.
The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 3 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 2 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 1 minute. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 30 seconds.
Yeah, the Seahawks making changes on the offensive side of the football, bringing Clint Kubiak as their new offensive coordinator. As far as DK Metcalf is concerned, is there a viable option for him to return to Seattle, Ian?
Yeah, I mean, it's always possible. And if Seattle doesn't get what they want, certainly he could return. But if he's going to return, I would expect it to be with a new contract going into the final year of his deal, wants a new deal. Generally, just speaking generally and historically, when a team and a player say, you know what, you can seek a trade, usually that means a player is getting traded. So we'll see what happens with DK Metcalf, but certainly that is a at least strong possibility.
It's more from Ian Rappaport this afternoon on NFL Network. Yeah, of course he could come back. Maybe Seattle pays him, but Seattle's in a little bit of a financial crunch. DK Metcalf officially requesting a trade, or it was leaked at least that he requested a trade today. I saw some reporting from Seattle people that the Seahawks aren't exactly psyched that this got out, including some commentary like they had just announced that Tyler Lockett was being released and they didn't like that. Okay, Tyler Lockett was a nice player, but what is he, going into the Hall of Fame today? Like, how dare DK Metcalf and his camp overshadow the release of Tyler Lockett? Like, that didn't really make sense. I think the Packers are just about the perfect destination for DK Metcalf. He's a perfect fit. He's the exact type of player they're looking for, fits currently into the room that they have really, really well. And the Packers can't just offer draft picks. They could also offer a player like Romeo Doubs. And other teams who are looking to add DK Metcalf, and I just use the Patriots as an example, they don't have a Romeo Doubs to add. And Jeremy Hanscani tweeted in and said, New England has players that don't play wide receiver to offer, though. Who? Jelani Tavai? Like Keon White? I was looking at their roster of that. No, they don't. I don't want any of those guys. Romeo Doubs is a legit 3-year wide receiver who's played in playoff games, caught balls in big moments. No, he's not a star, but guess what? You're not going to get a star. No one's sending Jamar Chase back for DK Metcalf and a pick. Oh yeah, and we have to pay him. So I'm not saying that like Seattle should just hand over DK Metcalf to the Packers, phone it in, it's done. I'm just saying all the little scraps and all the little bits of information that we have to go off of lends the Packers being a pretty good possibility for DK Metcalf is if he's traded, like you requested earlier today. J.R. Radcliffe in about 10 minutes. Let's take some calls on this in the meantime. 608-321-1670. Wisco Sports Show. Who's this?
Another DK Metcalf show. Let's go.
I know. We'll talk Badgers basketball tomorrow. We'll react to Wisconsin, Minnesota tomorrow, but I'm not just going to let this sit untalked about, undiscussed. This could be big for us, Cone. This could be big for our Packers.
Amen. And is Romeo Doubs really that nice of a trade piece? I think he's just kind of an average receiver.
He's fine. He's solid. He's
with some off the field issues.
Yeah, a little bit, which is part of the reason why I would be like more than okay with the Packers including him in a package to go get another player, right? I say Romeo Doubs is kind of the same level of player that Denver shipped out in the Russell Wilson trade. I'm going to go look up. I know Noah Fant was one. I think Shelby Harris was another. Like those are the types of players that get moved in moves like this, along with draft picks, of course.
Yeah, true. If it were up to you, if you were GM of the Packers, and you're more than qualified with the UWL degree, would you rather have Devontae Adams or DK Metcalf?
I'd rather have DK Metcalf. I know you have to give up something for him and pay him, but he's better. I think he fits better than Adams. Not that Adams doesn't fit, but I would rather have DK Metcalf because honestly, now that I got the idea in my mind of shipping off Romeo Doubs, I kind of like it a lot. So I'm not losing sleep over like, oh, I'd rather have Adams because you could keep Romeo Doubs. Like, I'm actually okay with the idea of shipping out Romeo Doubs this offseason.
Yeah, I'm more than okay with it. And last question, who do you think it has more drama behind them, Devontae Adams or DK Metcalf? Because they're both a little diva-y.
A little bit. I mean, they're both wide receivers who are very good. So that's kind of par for the course. They both have very different types of drama. Like Devontae Adams is the type who will go on podcasts and like say things and wow, man, one day I'll tell you the full story, that kind of thing. DK Metcalf he'll just get pissed and start fighting a defensive back, which honestly, I think this team needs a little bit of that. I'm not scared of that.
Yeah, DK is probably a little bit more of a dog.
Yeah.
And I think what this offense needs. So I would agree with you. I'm DK bandwagon, Donkey Kong, whatever you want to call him. We got to workshop some nicknames if he's going to be in the green and gold.
Yeah.
Already lost out on, Max Crosby. And then last thing, Minnesota is one of the most underrated Big Ten venues for the basketball.
That's a good take. Yeah, their team historically has stunk most of the time, but that's a cool venue. The barn is cool. Oh, I think Cone dropped off. I don't know if he meant to hang up. Sorry about that, Cone, if I lost you. The barn is cool. And they have the tradition of doing the roll off the court, which I don't know. I kind of mocked this morning. Zach shut me down real quick because it's tradition. And it is. Sorry, I hinted at the idea that maybe it's dumb. It's not. It's cool. They've been doing that for a long time. So when Denver traded for Russell Wilson, they sent Seattle a first, a second, and a fifth, plus a second and a fourth. In addition, I'm just going to read this verbatim so I make sure I'm not saying this wrong. Denver sent first, second, and fifth round picks in 2022 and second round picks in 2023 in exchange for Wilson and a fourth round pick. The players who went out, where are the player? So they sent out Drew Lock, Noah Fant, Shelby Harris, and Charles Cross, who is a tackle. Those players are all Romeo Doubs. Like Drew Lock is the Romeo Doubs of quarterbacks. Noah Fant is the Romeo Doubs of tight ends. Shelby Harris is the Romeo Doubs of defensive linemen. You know what I mean? That's the level of player. That's the type of player that normally changes hands as a supplement to let's say a draft pick, based compensation. If we're going to base a deal around a draft pick, well, throw in a couple players too for quarterback or throw in a player. And I'm no expert on Seattle, and maybe we should book a Seattle person. Maybe I should book a Seattle person with Bill tomorrow to talk more about this. But just from watching from afar the last couple of years, it's always appeared to me that that's a franchise that doesn't really have an appetite for rebuilding. They don't want to bottom out. They don't want to suck and draft. They're contending. All right, we're going to keep this thing going with Geno Smith. Where Pete Carroll's going anywhere. Like when they traded away Russell Wilson, I think most of the league perceived them as, well, they're going to suck now. They're going to tank. And I remember Seattle being like, no, we've good players. We like our coach. We're ready to rock with Geno Smith. Like they don't really have an appetite for bottoming out. So a compensation package based around a pick, yes, but also a nice player who can help them immediately. Like I think that would appeal to them. And that's not something that all teams can offer at that position, right? Another team might be able to throw in a guard or a corner, but the Packers can give a piece to immediately help make up for the lost production from Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. I was about to go to a phone call, but caller stopped calling, so I'll give you a sec to get back in here. 608-321-1670. Bobby in Menominee says, off the field issues, quote, it was one game and we still don't know what was going on. Don't know if you can trade injured Watson, but I want to keep Romeo Doubs. I'm not super bent out of shape about that. I think Doubs is good. I think DK Metcalf is better. I want to win a Super Bowl. This is not about trying to develop your own players in-house and prove that we drafted all of our guys. Like, no, sometimes you got to go out and get somebody. And if the cost is Romeo Doubs, I'm more than content in doing that. Isaac in Janesville says, if we get DK Metcalf, paired with Wicks, Reed, and Kraft, you also forgot to mention Jacobs and Musgrave. Yeah, Musgrave, we'll see. I think it would be an awesome trade. Yeah, the fit's great. He fits in seamlessly, and he's the exact type of build and size and speed and everything the Packers look for. So this makes all the sense in the world. Let's take one more call, and then we'll take a break, and we'll get to our friend J.R. Radcliffe, talk a little Packers, a little Metcalf, yes, but also a little bit about the Brewers, because that's kind of more his wheelhouse. And I think we've underserved the Brewers the last 2 weeks a little bit as spring training continues. They played this afternoon. Christian Yelich is playing the field. 608-321-1670. Wisco Sports Show. Who's this?
Grant Scory out of windy Madison. Right
windy.
It
doing? Is. Wait, you're not lying. It is windy out, Corey.
It is howling outside, as they say. It's like reminiscent of when I was up north this past weekend in the UP ice fishing when we were out on the lake. It was a little bit windy out there, but we did well fishing, so it was well worth it. But I digress. So we're talking DK Metcalf, right?
Yep.
Boy, I'll tell you, if the Packers could get him, that would be an immediate number one upgrade at wide receiver side. I texted him yesterday to Bill, and I said, if you get a time machine with Devontae Adams, well, this would be the time machine with a Devontae Adams, basically.
Yeah.
He's younger, and he's still got a lot in the tank. He's owed $18 million this year. I was looking up his details on Sport Track today to see, okay, what is his compensation package like and what have you. And they had added void years to his contract. So the comparables they had on there was as far as wide receivers, like Amon-Ra St. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, pretty high end wide receivers. So, this would be it would be awesome. Let's put it that way. I don't know if they're going to be able to do it for a Romeo Dobbs, and maybe you'd have to put together multiple picks or something like that versus just one first round. Not even sure where you would even start, but or if they're even willing to listen. But if they kind of chatted about it on the side last week over beers and bourbon and cigars and stuff, maybe now there's a little bit more of a serious opening there. So. Yeah, when you guys are talking about that today on Bill's show, I was that would be pretty spectacular. So
it'd be great.
That's really all I get.
I think if anything, Corey, I appreciate the call. I just got to run because I want to get to our guest on time here. Maybe they built a little bit of a base, just feelers. And now that DK Metcalf and his camp have kind of publicly applied pressure to Seattle. Well, let's link back up with Green Bay. Let's see how seriously they really want to pursue this thing. So I don't know. My hopes are high. Yeah, DK Metcalf is awesome. He's not really like a time machine to Devontae Adams. He's more like a reverse time machine with Christian Watson. If Christian Watson turned into the exact type of player they wanted him to be. And part of that is just injuries, right? But he's the size, speed, field stretcher, deep threat, force in the running game as well. It's perfect. Let's take a break. We'll talk about this with J.R. Radcliffe, the Journal Sentinel, coming up next. We'll also talk a little bit of Brewers. And I will get back to taking your calls. I promise. Right after this interview, we'll have time at 5 o'clock. We'll get right back to discussing DK Metcalf.
This is the Wisco Sports Show with Grant Bills on the Wisconsin Sports Zone Radio Network.
The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 5 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 4 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 3 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 2 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 1 minute. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 30 seconds.
It's the Wisco Sports Show. Appreciate you listening. We're going to get back to the DK Metcalf conversation. I'll get back to taking your calls towards 5 o'clock. Jesse Temple will join at the end of the show. Talk a little Badgers there in Minneapolis tonight to play the Gophers. Always look forward to that rivalry. And a very cool venue, as Cone mentioned. Underrated venue as far as Big Ten basketball arenas go. So we have all of that coming up over the next hour and 20 minutes. But it's been too long since we connected with J.R. Radcliffe, the Journal Sentinel. So I spoke with him just a little bit before the show started. You can see it on the live stream, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, at Wisco Grant. We start with the DK Metcalf stuff, but mostly we talk Brewers. So here's our conversation. Enjoy. J.R. Radcliffe is here, the Journal Sentinel. He made a big mistake this morning. He sent me something on Twitter and then was a little too chatty. And then I'm like, you know what? J.R. seems like he's having a bubbly day. Maybe he wants to do a radio hit. So you kind of were too friendly. You walked your way into this. So I apologize.
There's just certain rules of engagement. You don't, like if you're at a party, you never want the conversation to go too long because you just never know where that's going to go. You want to keep it light, small talk. And I made mistakes. Grant, we have some common interests on the TV front. So we started talking about a TV show that we're both watching. And before I knew it, I was on your show. So that's how it goes. And here I am. I mean, I got to pay. It's my penance for being just too social. Friendly. Grant, I will learn. Yeah. I will learn from my mistakes.
You should know better in the year 2025. Well, a big part of the show and Bill's show earlier, like DK Metcalf's available for trade. I just want to ask you big picture because I love your Brewers coverage and you do some Brewers and Bucks podcasting, but you're the trending sports reporter. So you have your thumb on the pulse always. Yeah. This seems like an offseason to me where Packers fans are looking around. I'm like, okay, one more time where the bridesmaid, not the bride. If it's not the Eagles, it's the Niners. If it's not the Niners, like I feel like Packers fans are getting to the end of the rope, especially with Goody saying, this has to be the offseason where we remind, we're trying to win championships. And now DK Metcalf's on the market. And I do have thoughts on the state of the Packers and maybe why this offseason could or should be different than they've been for the last, I don't know, let's say 15 years since the last time they made a Super Bowl.
Going into this offseason, I really expected it to be similar to the last one, which is when they did start spending money. Xavier McKinney, Josh Jacobs, obviously a very successful free agency for them last year. And they had the money to do it again. And up until my colleague Tom Silverstein reported that he did not expect that to be the Packers, modus operandi for this offseason, that did catch me off guard. I thought, oh no, this is a year that they double down, that they really go all in because they have the money to do it. They're not going to leave money on the table. I think DK Metcalf, he's really young yet, like 27 years old. That fits with what Brian Gutekunst likes to do. He brought in Xavier McKinney, astonishingly young for somebody who is that good and that talented, who had somehow never been to a Pro Bowl, but like that available. Josh Jacobs likewise had some tread on the tire. I mean, these are the types of players that he will really go to bat for, that he'll really open up the pocketbook for. And it, you do get the sense that they have to get a receiver, right? And if there isn't that obvious choice, they never go to the draft for this sort of thing. So it feels like Devontae Adams would work. A veteran guy like that would work. But what really works is a 27-year-old guy who's available in the trade market like DK Metcalf is. And it feels like he fits exactly what they're looking for, especially without Christian Watson. So, I mean, I think that's a real possibility. I really like that option for them.
Well, and what I like, he comes in and he plays the Christian Watson role, except he's shown that he can stay healthy and be a little bit more consistent. And I'm not trying to drag Watson, but it's just never really reached cruise control for any extended period of time, maybe save for 5 or 6 games, especially at the end with Aaron Rodgers. But he comes in, plays the Watson role. You can trade away Dobbs, which might actually clean up the Packers situation a little bit. You don't have to ponder an extension. The targets get distributed behind Metcalf then to Reed and to Wicks. And also, unless some team wants to throw multiple firsts at Seattle for DK Metcalf, which I don't expect because you got to extend him anyways, the Packers could go, hey, John Schneider, Seattle, we know you guys don't like to bottom out. You don't want to rebuild. You want to keep, here's a proven commodity at wide receiver to go with a pick. And I just don't know how many other teams are able to offer something like that. I think that has to appeal to John Schneider and the Seahawks.
I'm totally with you on that. The only thing, honestly, that works against it in my mind is like, this is too obvious. It makes perfect sense that they have depth, but not a difference maker. I mean, it fits in that Romeo Dobbs is like, you don't want to think of him as expendable because he was very valuable to the Packers. And I do think he has a skill set that is a little separate from the other guys, but not a skill set that you can live without. So if you need to get, surrender capital, like you just said, they're loath to give up draft picks. And here's a guy who is a quality, not even just an NFL receiver, but a quality NFL receiver to soften the blow. You get your difference maker. You don't surrender in draft capital. You bridge the gap to Christian Watson. I mean, you just said like Metcalf, Reed, Wicks. That's a heck of a receiving core. That's, and don't forget Tucker Kraft as a tight end is, developing. Josh Jacobs showed he could be really valuable in the passing game. They've get Bo Melton, like they've got other guys on top of it. So, I feel like it's I'm not going to say no brainer because it's never a no brainer. The Packers never operate with the obvious move, but it sure looks like it's as clear cut as it comes. Like that's something they should absolutely explore, if not outright, make happen today.
And Devontae Adams could make sense too, but there's some redundancies there, right? Like do Wicks and Adam, and look, you take Devontae Adams, you deal with the redundancies, the younger guys, but that's why Metcalf is so perfect. He plays a role, and then you can still allow the other guys to play their roles because I still believe in their young guys, even though they didn't explode in year 2, like many of us thought. J.R. Radcliffe is here. You can read his work at the Journal Sentinel. I also just adore the Microbrew podcast. You're a great point guard, whether you're assisting to Kurt or to Todd, who's been down in spring training. I believe Kurt just arrived in the last couple of days, so definitely listen to that podcast. Last year, you're not negative about the Brewers, but you were okay, but I don't mean it in a bad way. You're like, I don't really know how they're winning all these games. They shouldn't be winning all these games. They're getting by and they're finding wins. I might be coming into that school of thought going into this year. Let's start big picture first. This seems like it could be the year where some of the issues that maybe haven't hurt them in years past maybe start to hurt them. Maybe they pull back a little bit this year. I wouldn't be surprised.
And that is what I said, that the magic ultimately runs out. That yes, they have developed a system where they can spend less and win more. That's how they've done it the past 2+ seasons. And who am I to sit here and say, well, they didn't get dramatically better this offseason, whereas another team in the division, the Chicago Cubs, did get, I would say, I don't know, markedly better, but they got better. And were already, I think, a little bit better than their win-loss record showed last year. To me, that feels like a recipe for taking a big step backwards if you're the Milwaukee Brewers. But I thought that last year. I thought they didn't do enough. I was happy with the Rhys Hoskins signing, which ultimately was not the reason that this team was good. I didn't think the pitching realistically had enough. And, it wasn't world beating, but it certainly had enough to be a 93-win baseball team. You can't be upset about it. So sometimes I say this stuff and it's like, am I just going to be wrong over and over and over again?
You're not wrong, but the results, you might just not match the results. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think there is a secret sauce to this team that I think is still elusive to all of us. What is it about their pattern of speed and defense and, having just the right amount of pitching and sort of these sort of rehabilitation projects that they take to turn into quality bullpen pieces or even quality starters, their ability to find success on the fringes and then supplement that with just enough star power, like just the bare minimum, William Contreras, Christian Yelich when he's healthy, they have just enough of the juice to be more than just a good team, but to be like a certified playoff qualifier every single year. I can't explain it, as much as I've watched this team, I don't have my fingers specifically on the pulse of what they have figured out. If they do have it, if they indeed have it figured out, or if they are just kind of seeing what they can get away with. Like, okay, well, we think this might work. It did. Let's dial down the payroll a little bit less. Let's see if it works. Okay, it did. Let's dial it down a little bit less. Let's do a little bit less in free agency. The one thing you could say is that they invest heavily in their, and they'll tell you this. They'll send press releases about it. Their Latin Academy, they love it. And I've rolled my eyes at that, but you cannot deny that it has borne significant fruit throughout the organization. Obviously, at the top of the organization with Jackson Chourio, and they do seem to hit on so many more trades or like minor roster moves than they miss on. They just seem to get a net gain with almost every single move that they make. So I have to acknowledge that they have found ways to make this work. I do think the Jose Quintana signing is good. He's like maybe like 1 or 2 wins better than what your average fit starter would be probably at this point in his career. But I like it. I think that was a quality signing. They paid nothing for him. So I do think that's something, especially as their starting depth has taken a little bit of a hit. That's a move I think they had to make. And so that actually makes me feel a little bit better about them. I still I look at this infield and I'm like, are you guys serious? Is this really what you're going to try to do? But it's what they kind of did last year. You couldn't have told me that a Bryce Terang, Joey Ortiz, Willy Adames, and then throw in Rhys Hoskins and tell me he gives you the production that he gives you. There's no way I would have looked at that and said, oh, that team is going to win the NL Central and win 93 games. No way. And yet they did. So maybe I might just be an idiot, Grant. I might just be stupid. I don't know.
Well, and maybe the Brewers are making us idiots. I think it's funny that this is the spring training where Bob Nightingale and Ken Rosenthal come into Brewers camp to talk with Mark Attanasio and almost had the spirit, like showing up to write these stories. They almost showed up with the spirit of, this guy can't keep getting away with this. Like he can't keep continuing. Well, let's see if we can spend a little bit less. And they invest in certain things. I think Brewers fans need to realize that facilities and investments in Latin American countries, like that's a real thing. Would you rather spend $10 million on a mid player for a year? Would you rather invest that into an academy that, like, there's a real conversation to be had there, but that doesn't show up on, SpoTrack or Over the Cap or wherever you look at payroll figures for baseball. What do you think is a proper expectation for Jackson Chourio now that he's got his rookie year, now that he's broken in and played professional baseball? How much can we expect and still be realistic, do you think, this season?
Well, I mean, I think we have to be open-minded to the idea that he will take a step back. Maybe initially, I don't know if that's actually going to happen. Like, it would not surprise me either if he came out and was just crushing the ball right away. But it just feels a little bit too fairy tale for him to come in right off the gate and be the best player on this team. I don't think that's going to happen. I think William Contreras is the best player on this team, and I think Christian Yelich is second if he's healthy, and Jackson Chourio is third. He's going to be probably moving around a little bit in the outfield in terms of position. So, I mean, I could see him playing some center field with Blake Perkins injured. Is that going to throw him off a little bit? You're going to have pitchers completely adjusting to him, completely, knowing his tendencies more so. So you would think there's going to be a step back. I do think if at the end of the year he's not your third best hitter, I think there could be some disappointment. Like that's still what I would expect from him, to be one of the top 3 offensive players on this team. But if he is the 5th or 6th or 7th best offensive player on this team, no worries whatsoever, because he's 21 years old. So you're only going to go up from there. And there's no, that disappointment should not be like disappointment. It's just, oh, that's kind of a bummer, but like, that's okay. He's going to be amazing going forward. He's going to be amazing, Grant. Just so good. I have so little doubt in his trajectory. I don't know 2025 if I think he's going to be like an all-star, but that's coming. It's going to happen. It's going to happen a lot. So I'm not so worried about this next year for him. In a way, it's a little bit icing on the cake. I think the viewpoint should be he can do no wrong. He's still 21 years old. Even if he's really bad and hits 220 and only hits like 15 home runs, he's still 21 years old and he's going to be fine. So, and I think he'll be better than that. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a literal, not a child by the letter of the law, but I think of myself at age 21 like I was a child.
His birthday is coming up. I think he's about to turn 21. I think it's in March, right?
Is he not 21 yet?
No, I don't think so. I think he's about to turn 21 years old. Incredible. Incredible that he is he's not there yet.
Can't even
March 11th. He is a week away from his first legal drink in the United States of America. Incredible.
What an infamous birthday to have, by the way. I'll never forget March 11th back in 2020. That's the day where like all of the sudden like NBA games are getting canceled and Tom Hanks said that was the night I'll never forget. And I wasn't 21, but I was a child, thinking back to when I was a child. When
Jackson Churio was turning 16 years old?
Oh my God.
When COVID started, Jackson Churio was turning 16 years old. Incredible.
Yeah, that is a little nuts. Do you think if you had to, you don't have to give me more than 60 seconds on this, but if you had to pick a team to win the Central right now, would it be the Cubs?
It would be. Yeah, it'd be the Cubs. They got. I've said this a few times, but they brought in unquestionably the best new player into the division.
They got a
Kyle
star.
Tucker. Yeah, they got a star, a legitimate star. I think their pitching staff is really good. I thought it was really good last year. They brought back a ton, not Cody Bellinger, but a ton of the players. That again was a pretty unlucky team last year. They had a bullpen that did them no favors, but that's volatile. The type of thing that might be, the type of thing that might just completely correct itself this year. I'm intrigued by some of their the fringe guys that they brought in too. I think they're going to be okay. This third baseman Matt Shaw, interested to see where he develops. That's going to be. He probably won't be there right at the start, but he'll be there early enough. That's sort of their plan B for not getting Alex Bregman. I think it is a huge benefit to the Brewers, and Alex Bregman did not end up in this division.
Agreed.
It would have been nice if he ended up with the Brewers, but let's be realistic. So I think that leaves the door open that the Brewers can be the better team. But I do think the Cubs are the one to watch here.
I think so too. I think last year in Council, as much as we rip the guy, like he was right when he said we have a lot of players who are very good, who all are having average or below average seasons, right? And the key for his success with the Brewers for a long time is you had Yelich a superstar early, but then you had a roster of guys who were very good, and you could bet in any given year that one of them was going to have an extra special season, and that kind of gets the runs across the plate, and that kind of gets you to the finish line. But the Cubs roster last year, everyone was average or below average, so you bring in Kyle Tucker, that helps kind of with that just a little bit.
And one thing with Council that you could really say about him is that he didn't suffer foolishness. He really just rolled his eyes at just about everything. I'm going to watch Council just be like, I told you, I wasn't worried. These guys are good. We had a bad year, but we're going to be better. And I could see him become the front runner for the NL Manager of the Year as the Cubs bounce back. Craig Council shrugs when they're like, well, what did the Cubs do differently? I'm like, I told you, we were good. It just didn't work out. We just got a couple more breaks and got one better player, and that's all it took.
That's your take? I think that's a bad take. That's a bad take. That was my favorite moment of the season last year. JR, I appreciate you. Maybe we'll have to talk severance theories or something at some point, but thank you.
Absolutely. I'm all in on it. Love it. Love it. Talk to you soon, Grant.
This is the Wisco Sports Show with Grant Bills on the Wisconsin Sports Zone Radio Network.
The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 3 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 2 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 1 minute. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 30 seconds.
It's the Wisco Sports Show. Got a minute or two here before we break at 5 o'clock. We'll get an update from Austin, and then I promise I'll get back to your phone calls if you want to get in and talk about how DK Metcalf to the Packers makes sense or doesn't make sense. He requested a trade officially, or we learned of it officially today. He wants out of Seattle. I will reiterate the details so we're all on the same page, and then if you have a thought, I would love to take your calls here after the break at 5 o'clock. I got a couple of texts here. Bobby Menominee is worried about off-the-field issues. Duncan Holman says DK is kind of a I'm a peacock captain, you got to let me fly type of guy. Won't happen. Hey, Packers fans. I hear from many of you, not all, but I hear from many of you, the Packers need to be more aggressive, right? What they've been doing hasn't been enough. It's not enough to just draft and develop and to take projects. It's not enough to just be the youngest team in football anymore. It's not enough. I mean, look, it's been 15 years since they've been to a Super Bowl. They're always the bridesmaid, never the bride. It's not enough. They got to go for it. And then when an opportunity like this arises, a player that would fit perfectly, a player who's in the prime of his career, a player that would fit the measurables, the height and the weight, the exact type of thing the Packers are looking for. When this player comes up, well, he got angry once upon a time. He's got a little bit of a temper. I don't know. He's not a good fit. Well, he needs a new contract. I mean, how much are we supposed to pay for the guy? Hey, good players are expensive. Sometimes good players have a little bit of an ego. It happens. Do you want the Packers to go for this thing or not? Do you want them to get back to another Super Bowl or not? They might need to have a hothead on the roster. They might need to trade away a draft pick or spend a little money. Packers fans, sack up just a little. We'll talk more about this next, hour 2, after Austin's update.
This is a Wisconsin Sports Zone update.
Well, the Bucks would stay hot last night in Atlanta, beating the Hawks 127-121. They got contributions from everyone as 6 players reached double digits in scoring, but it was Giannis leading the way, recording his 6th triple-double of the season with 26 points, 11 rebounds, and 10 assists. Milwaukee is now 22-1 this season when scoring 120 points or more. They improved to a season best 10 games above 500 and will be in action again tonight at home against the Mavericks for a 7 o'clock tip-off. And turning to the Packers, who have re-signed a couple of players this week, agreeing on a 2-year deal with linebacker Isaiah McDuffie on Monday, and yesterday bringing back kicker Brandon McManus to a 3-year deal worth around $15 million. After joining the team in Week 7 this season, McManus brought reliability back to the kicking position in Green Bay, making 20 of his 21 attempts, including 2 game winners.
Rural Mutual Insurance, keeping Wisconsin strong.
Farmers deal with a lot, including long days, stress, and fatigue. This is your reminder to take breaks, stretch, have a snack, and hydrate your body. Avoid farm accidents by keeping yourself healthy. Visit ruralmutual.com to learn how Rural Mutual supports Wisconsin farmers and prioritize safety on the farm.
Rural Mutual Insurance, keeping Wisconsin strong.
Well, the Badgers will be in Minnesota tonight, trying to get back into the win column after a loss on Sunday to Michigan State. Winning tonight and on Saturday against Penn State will secure Wisconsin a top 4 seed and double bye in the Big Ten tournament next week. They'll tip off tonight at 7:30. And lastly, the Brewers were in split squad action today with both teams facing the White Sox. Tobias Myers pitched 3 no-hit innings with 3 strikeouts. For the Wisconsin Sports Zone Network, I'm Austin Harper.
That's right. Another situation that has been bubbling for the last several weeks. DK Metcalf, as colleague Tom Pelissero and I reported this morning, has requested a trade from Seattle. He had a meeting this morning with Seattle brass, discussed the trade request. The team has acknowledged it and essentially said, you are allowed to explore it, and they will do some exploring as well. It is not a great free agent class at the receiver position. It is not a great receiver class in the draft. Players like DK Metcalf, I would say similar to Deebo Samuel, when they become available and there's just not a lot of other players where teams can improve upon their roster with, these guys become coveted. I expect there to be significant interest in DK Metcalf. We'll see if Seattle gets enough interest to do a trade. This is really one of the best receivers in the NFL. The fact that he's become available, I can assure you, teams have noticed.
We need to continue to ramp up our sense of urgency. The life of a player in the National Football League is not very long. We got a bunch of good guys in that locker room. We got a bunch of talented guys in that locker room. And yeah, I think it's time that we start competing for championships, right?
This is where Wisconsin gathers to talk sports. Packers, Brewers, Badgers, Bucks. The Wisco Sports Show is on the air. Now, here's your host, Grant Bills.
I want to take your calls about DK Metcalf if you have thoughts. It's the big story of the day. But coming up after our next break, I got to share with you some reporting from our friend Ryan Glasspiegel, who's with Front Office Sports these days. Used to be at the New York Post. It's got a story out an hour ago at their website. Pat McAfee will not be taking his show to the NFL draft after being treated with what he says was insufficient respect by middle managers at the scouting combine. So no Pat McAfee show in Green Bay, which is a little bit of a bummer because while I don't listen to the McAfee show, I would imagine Green Bay kind of fits their small town, football town history, right? AJ Hawk's on the show. Like, it sucks they won't be there. I'm also hearing from my fellow Packers owners, we talk, right? We have a network built up. I'm hearing that maybe part of this decision is based on the fact that he's ducking Brian Gutekunst, the general manager that he's not been too nice to publicly the last couple of years. So I'll share some details with you. It's kind of a funny story, but I want to get your calls. DK Metcalf, we learned today that he has officially requested a trade from Seattle. I think he fits perfectly. If you ship out Romeo Doubs, you bring him back in. He's your new Christian Watson. Dontavian Wicks, Jaden Reed, they play their roles. Tucker Kraft plays their role. Perfect. DK Metcalf is big. He is strong. He is tall. That's the exact type of thing the Packers are looking for. He can be a factor in the run game. He can stretch the field vertically. All of the things. Oh, and also, if Seattle doesn't want to tear this thing down to the studs and rebuild it completely, and recent precedent would show that they're not too crazy about that idea, well, the Packers can give them a pick, but anybody can give them a pick. The Packers can also say, here's Romeo Doubs. He's a player with great experience the last 3 years, been very productive, not a superstar, but this is a nice piece that you can get back in an effort to continue to build your team. I think it makes a lot of sense. If you have thoughts, I would love to hear them. 608-321-1670. Back to the phones. Wisco Sports Show. Who's this?
Hey, Grant, Uncle Packer.
Hey, Uncle Packer, what's going on?
I've been trying not to rant too much. I've been waiting for the league year to start, but it's all year. The NFL is year round. So there's no waiting. We got this pre-stage or a mess and it's the 12th of March is the new season, correct?
Something like that. Yeah, I think the new league year starts. Yeah, I can look it up. Yeah.
I'm so excited about this offseason. I hope Brian Gutekunst has got to go for it. We need to go for it in every way. And I love DK Metcalf. You remember when he ran Budda Baker down that one time after that interception?
I do. That kind of thing got Josiah DeGuara drafted in the 3rd round. So there's another reason. Throw that reason on the pile. That's another great reason the Packers should want him.
it gives me goosebumps. I'd love to have him. I don't care what color his hair is. And again, but he reminds me a little bit of Dennis Rodman. And I loved Rodman. I mean, he was great. I just want him. I don't think he needs to resurrect his career, but getting him and a significant defensive end, I want a lot. I want Gutekunst to do a lot.
You want it all.
Busy.
You want the whole shooting match.
I don't want to trade a lot, though, for DK Metcalf. I'm thinking if we go Romeo Dobbs and maybe a third round, not even a third round, a fifth round, because Deebo Samuels went for a fifth round.
Yeah, Deebo Samuel's older. Like DK Metcalf is 27. How old's Deebo? But Deebo's also been more banged up.
29.
Okay, a little bit older. That matters.
Man, I don't want to give a lot. What I really want them to do is get a DK Metcalf or a Devontae Adams and address our defensive line. I just want that done in our offseason. And I would be way happy. That would be great.
I think you throw a bunch of draft picks at corner, you add a wide receiver, and if you can find a veteran to throw along the pass rush, it doesn't have to be a superstar, but just bring in somebody along that pass rush. Khalil Mack's a dream, right? That would be the dream. But whoever you can find to kind of supplement that group along the front four, love it.
The dream would be Myles Garrett or Max Crosby.
Crosby signed his extension today. Do you see that? He got $90 million guaranteed. Biggest, richest contract for a non-quarterback ever.
Yeah, he'll be a great player that never won a Super Bowl in Las Vegas.
He might never make forget Super Bowl. He might never make the playoffs from this point on out.
I think that's why Josh Jacobs left, because he knew if he stayed at that organization, they're never going to do nothing.
Yeah, especially a guy who had a background. He played at Bama. He played for Saban at Bama, Uncle Packer. That dude knows what it's like to win.
He knows how to win.
Yeah.
And he wants to be here. I wish he had talked to him. So Myles Garrett. Then I want Myles Garrett, Myles Garrett, DK Metcalf, and Devontae Adams, or something like that. I want Gutekunst to get off his Gutekunstness and do the best he can for this year, because our window's open. Am I way off?
No, I don't think you're way off. And you know what? You don't need to wait until the beginning of the league year to rant. You can rant anytime. The NFL is year-round, like you said, Uncle Packer.
It's year-round. I got one more quick thing. I love you and your sports show, man. I tell you, you made it so nice. When I first moved back from California 20 years ago, I had to get Sirius Satellite to get any sports radio. But all from the Bill show to your show, man, I love listening to sports. You make me so happy, Grant. Thank you, man. Thank you so much.
Uncle Packer, I appreciate you. Thank you for listening. And you're probably missing California on days like today. It's an icy nightmare out there. I couldn't open the back door of my car. I was trying to get my scraper out of the back seat of my car. I couldn't get it was frozen. I was pulling on it, but I didn't want to break the handle. So what I did was I went to the downwind side of the car, the leeward side of the car, out of the wind. That one wasn't as frozen, so I climbed in that side, and then I climbed through the back seat, pushed it open from the inside. I didn't want to break the handle. You know what I mean? Very icy. You're probably missing California on a day like today. Uncle Packer, I don't think you're asking for too much. Just go get Myles Garrett, Devontae Adams, and DK Metcalf. I mean, you don't want to give up too much, but if you could do all of those things. I think if you could get DK Metcalf for Devontae Adams, that's a shot in the arm for your wide receiving core, right? And a presence that's going to come in and legitimize the group a little bit. And I'm also expecting big things from Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks in this coming year. I'm not giving up on them. This is a supplement. You're bringing in something to add to that young core and to give yourself a little insurance. You know, if Dontavian Wicks or Jaden Reed, one of them gets banged up or one of them, slumps a little bit to start the year, to end the year, you just have more options. You know what I mean? So it's not that I don't believe in Jaden Reed or Dontavian Wicks, but the Packers are not at a point now in the trajectory of their team where they can sit back and say, well, I hope it works. I hope the young guys get better. I hope the young guys stay healthy. Hoping that's not a plan. That's not a game plan, right? You got to bring in some pieces to supplement what you already have. Much of the same on the defensive line. I still have some hope for Lucas Van Ness. Not a ton, but I have a little. And I think Rashawn Gary's a nice player. I think Kenny Clark is probably due for the biggest bounce back season next year. With that toe hopefully taken care of and the second year in a new scheme. I just think Kenny Clark's too good of a player to be invisible for a second straight year. No, I don't think he's over the hill. He's 27, 28. He's still super young. So I think there will be some natural growth and progression from the defensive front. But again, hope is not a trust or faith. That's not a game plan this offseason. So bring in somebody else to add. And then the rest of the defense, I actually think is pretty good. Just go about making your draft picks, take who you like, throw a couple picks at corner. But if you can get a veteran at wide receiver, DK Metcalf or Devontae Adams and then add another presence on the pass rush, you can kind of just go into the draft looking for great players. Another wide receiver to get into the mix, linebackers, corners, edge rushers, defensive lineman, probably a big spot that they would target. But I don't think this defense is in need of a lot. You had a player here, a player there. I think you're pretty good. The defense was the better of the two units at the end of last season. Not that you'd ever know that based on the way that people talk about the Packers on sports talk radio and television. 608-321-1670. Wisco Sports Show. Who's this?
This is Laverne.
Say that one more time. Laverne where?
Laverne and Lady Smith.
What's going on, Laverne? What's up? Hey, your connection up there in Ladysmith stinks. I'm gonna drop you off. Call back in a minute or two when it gets a little bit better. Laverne and Ladysmith. God dang it. Johnny Driftless texts in. Call back, Laverne. I mean it. Call back. I'm not gonna just get service a little bit better, and I'll get you on. Johnny Driftless says, if you were Goody with a 4 or 5 year championship window, wouldn't you take your biggest swings in those first couple of years? You can make small tweaks in the remaining years. Seems like he's adding a little here and a little there and hopes to eventually assemble that championship team in year 4 or 5. No. Don't tell me about year 4 or 5. Don't tell me about year 4 or 5. This was advertised at the end of last season because the end of last season was a disappointment. They kind of sputtered out at the end of the year. They mostly stunk in the division, although I think they played a good game against Detroit in Detroit. They just didn't win. And they beat Chicago the first time. I think the Chicago games were flipped. Those results should have been flipped. The Packers deserved to lose in Chicago, and they deserved to win at home. The results just didn't reflect that. So you split against the Bears, which isn't acceptable. And you get swept by the Vikings and the Bears. And then you lose in the first round of the playoffs to the Eagles for a second time. And then I have to read stories from people like Rob Domofsky, who does fine work, about how Goody's got a plan. And this is just the next step in his master plan. And it's really a 3-year plan. And everything's supposed to come together next year. And if you look at wide receiver progression, they normally pop in year 3. This is the year. Okay, well, then it's year 3. This is the year then. Especially when Goody punctuates his end of the season presser by saying, we got to up our sense of urgency. We got to contend for Super Bowls again. Okay, then this is the year. Yeah, no. Don't say, well, really, it's a 4 or 5 year. No, I refuse to accept that. I've been told too many times that this will be the year, that it's a 3-year thing. So this is the year. And as I talked about with Vagabond John last night, talking about taking big swings, if you trade a pick and you sign DK Metcalf to a contract and he's not an unbelievable superstar, what are you out? A little bit of cap space? Sure, but you can always manufacture cap space, and it's 1 draft pick or 2 draft picks. I saw the Rams light every draft pick they had on fire for half a decade. They're fine. They're perfectly fine. If you're a team with good process and you can get by with this and that and the other thing, and I think the Packers are a team with good process, well, you can take big swings, and it's not going to sink your franchise, even if it doesn't work. 608-321-1670. Maybe this is Laverne, or maybe this is another caller. Let's try again. Wisco Sports Show. Who's this?
This is Vern in Viroqua.
Vern, what's up, Vern? Better service down there?
Yeah, I moved pretty quickly.
Yeah, you did. No kidding.
Yeah. No, I guess I was wondering, do you think Goody is at all – everyone's got an ego in sports. The players, the management, even the most humble people have egos.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think he's at all hesitant to go make a big swing for a wide receiver, whether that's DK Metcalf or whoever, just because it'll be, kind of an indictment on the whole kind of wide receiver by committee kind of a process that they had, dating back 2 or 3 years. I think they were hoping that Dobbs or Watson or somebody would become the alpha, and nobody really has. Do you think at all that comes across his mind as a reason to say, well, then I'll kind of look like a dummy or have a little egg on my face? Do you think he thinks about that?
I think that ego applies to general managers. Yes. I don't know that it's applicable in this instance. Because I don't know that Brian Gutekunst was ever screaming from the mountaintops, like, we don't need a number 1 wide receiver. We got 5 of them. I think fans were saying that. I don't think that was ever Goody's approach. I think Goody's approach was, we need to get younger and we need to reset this roster around Jordan Love. So we drafted a bunch of young wide receivers, and they all showed a lot of promise and pop. And I don't fault him at all for handling last year the way that he did. A lot of promise, these guys in their rookie years, Romeo Doubs and Watson in year 2. Let's bring them back in year 3 and see what happens. And they were fine, but nobody ascended to superstar level. I don't know that this was some master plan by Brian Gutekunst. I think he was just building his roster, and it fell this way, right? And now he has an opportunity to get it, make it better. And I don't think he's going to pass it up because it would be some indictment of something that he's already done. Does that make sense? And even if they bring in DK Metcalf, Vern, like they still got Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, and Tucker Kraft behind him. Like that's still a really good unit.
Yeah, I always thought way too much was made of, well, the Packers haven't spent a first-round pick on a wide receiver since da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
They always had a first-round talent at wide receiver, whether that was Jordy Nelson or Devontae Adams. Well, all of a sudden they didn't, and I'm not saying that drafting one in the first round was the way to go or to make a big trade for one, but the Packers haven't had a wide receiver one the last 2 years, and I think that showed this year more than any. And I just think they have to get somebody on the outside who's dependable. Dobbs or Reed or one of these guys, they could pop up and have 7 catches for 92 yards and a touchdown.
Yep.
But then the next week they'd have 1 catch for 11 yards.
Yep.
They need somebody who every week, okay, this guy's getting me 80 plus yards. He's getting me 6-7 balls. They have to find that person.
Yeah, and Vern, that's a really good call. I appreciate you. Sorry to dump you, but your phone sucked. I could barely hear you. Your connection sucked. I'm sure your phone was fine. I still think the young wide receivers are going to be really good. They just weren't good enough in year 2. And the Packers are in a spot signing a guy like Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney, and they have so much talent. This team's kind of ready to go. You can't sit on your hands and wait for these young guys to come along. It's like baseball, right? Like we talked about this with JR. The Cubs had a lot of players last year who are good. Not superstars, but they're good. And they all kind of had down years last year. Well, if you have one superstar in the middle of the lineup who you can count on all the time, the rest of the roster starts to perform a lot better and it works a lot better. And it's the same with this Packers group. Like I still think Jaden Reed has star potential. Same with Wicks. Kraft, we've seen it. It's just you're at a point now as a team where you kind of got to push a little bit harder. You can't sit and wait. So I don't know that acquiring DK Metcalf is some indictment on the players that they have. I just think it's an opportunity to get better, and the Packers are at a place in their team building progression right now where they should be trying to get better, and they should be really trying to win. 608-321-1670. One more call, then we'll take our break. Wisco Sports Show. Who's this?
This is Barry in La Crosse.
Hey, what's up, Barry?
I just think, when's the last time we had a guy that looked like DK Metcalf? Like, just a physical stud.
Greg Jennings, maybe?
Kind of lead that. Yeah, but, I mean, that big guy that can just go get everything, and he would lead the room. And I don't want to stop with him either. Let's get Devontae too and sign Khalil Mack if we can, if it makes sense. I just want to be realistic about it. I don't think we're getting Myles Garrett. I don't think we're getting Max Crosby. But, like, can we win an offseason for once and at least go down swinging?
Yeah. Can we win an offseason for once? Yeah. Look, the last time they had a guy like DK Metcalf, and I was just thinking physically, like Greg Jennings, specimen of an athlete. They've had over the last,
Finley?
What was that? Finley? Yeah, Finley's another one. Dude, I saw Finley at the Super Bowl. That dude looks like he could still play. Finley was one. Yeah, that's probably another example. I mean, he's built, and the Packers like wide receivers like that. They like guys who are built. So this is just another reason why Metcalf makes so much sense.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Let's finally, instead of waiting on the next turn, let's get it done. Let's go for it.
Yeah. And again, I think it's timing. I think there's been plenty, appreciate the call, Barry. There's been plenty of off seasons where it's like the Packers didn't do much of anything, but it made sense. You know what I mean? This is an off season where sitting on your hands, waiting for young guys. Hey, we have the youngest roster in the league. That's not where they're at in their progression as a roster. These rosters, they're windows, right? Even if you try to sustain success, there's still levels to that success, right? The Packers in 2014 were so much better than they were in 2012. Made the playoffs in 2012. They were contending in 2012, but levels to it. This is a point in their roster right now with free agents coming in last year where this thing should really start to kind of convalesce and come together, and a little bit of aggression will go a long way, especially trying to acquire a player like DK Metcalf. Let's take a 3-minute break. We'll continue the show next.
This is the Wisco Sports Show with Grant Bills on the Wisconsin Sports Zone Radio Network.
The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 3 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 2 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 1 minute. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 30 seconds.
Yeah, the Seahawks making changes on the offensive side of the football, bringing Clint Kubiak as their new offensive coordinator. As far as DK Metcalf is concerned, is there a viable option for him to return to Seattle, Ian?
Yeah, I mean, it's always possible. And if Seattle doesn't get what they want, certainly could return. But if he's going to return, I would expect it to be with a new contract going into the final year of his deal, wants a new deal. Generally, just speaking generally and historically, when a team and a player say, you know what, you can seek a trade, usually that means a player is getting traded. So we'll see what happens with DK Metcalf, but certainly that is a at least strong possibility.
Ian Rappaport on NFL Network earlier today, just, a follow-up question and answer about his original report of DK Metcalf wanting out and teams around the league taking notice. I think it makes all the sense in the world for the Packers for reasons that we discussed on Friday, and I've added some additional reasons to the pile tonight. Jesse Temple, the Athletic, going to join us to talk Wisconsin Badgers basketball, playing the Gophers tonight up in the Twin Cities, but football as well. Always got to ask because spring practice just a couple weeks away. Some time for calls. In the meantime, 608-321-1670. Wisco Sports Show. Who's this?
Tony from Texas. Happy Ash Wednesday, Grant.
Hey, Tony. Today is this is a big day for you. You've set to make some big sacrifices
Grant,
this Lenten season.
Yeah, we're off to a rough start. We go to morning mass, Grant, and then we go to Pilates class. The yoga pants are my kryptonite. I'm just praying to God. I need an Ike Catholic podcast. I'm just really struggling here. But not as bad as the Dallas-Fort Worth market. And I know when Tony from Texas calls, people want to know what's going on with the Dallas team.
Everyone's always like, we need the latest from the Lone Star State. Every time Tony, people clamor for it. You're exactly right.
I think people actually do think that. And let me tell you right now, the Rangers are horrible. The Cowboys are terrible. And the Mavericks, people are wondering if the team's going to tank to move to Vegas. So I'm feeling pretty good about the Bucks, Brewers, and Packers right now, Grant.
It's pretty crazy what's happening to the Mavs. It's pretty crazy. Well, and you mentioned the Cowboys, too. It's funny. They restructured Dak's contract and CeeDee Lamb's contract, and, good for the Cowboys. But my first thought was, if they had just signed those guys early instead of waiting till the 11th hour or the 12th hour, whatever, They wouldn't have had to do this. And they would have had the cap season last offseason to maybe make some moves so their team wouldn't have sucked.
You know, I don't understand what Jerry waits for.
No, I don't either.
He's just going to piss off the player, and then he ends up paying above market value anyway.
Well, exactly. It would be one thing if you piss off the player, but there's something to be gained from it. It's like, yeah, the player might not like this, but it's going to benefit the team. The players hate it, and it's bad for the team. And the salary cap and the financial health and situation of the team. It makes no sense. But then again, like, that's Jerry Jones. I kind of enjoy him because he's kind of funny and he gives us content. But at the end of the day, I'm like, man, I don't understand why he does the things that he does.
Yeah, a couple of quick points. You know, once in a while I have a good zinger in there. I think my top from 2024 is Mike McCarthy should have held out. So, you know, Big Mike, thank God he's got his own pick of the litter now. He can find a team to go to. But as far as our Packers, you know, this DK Metcalf kind of reminds me of Javon Walker, a little bit before your time. Same kind of player, big muscular guy, can get open. And, you know, I could see the Packers getting to play for that. But I don't think they're going to pull the trigger. I really don't. I don't think they're going to go for DK. Schneider and Good are buddies, but I don't know if Schneider's going to do it, man. I don't think he's going to do it. You know how they kind of have a pissing contest with your buddy? I just don't know if that's going to happen. Like bragging rights kind of thing.
I love having pissing contests with my buddies. In fact, I went to visit a buddy 2 weekends ago, and we were drinking out in the garage, and we took turns going to piss in the backyard, and we would start a sentence, and then we'd continue. It's not really a contest. It was more of a piss collaboration, not so much a piss contest.
Who had the longest distance?
We weren't going for distance. We were going for quality, legibility.
Us. Yeah, a good flow, good stream. I'm glad you're a healthy man. Hey, Bucks are looking better, by the way. I've been down the Bucks. We don't talk Bucks.
They are.
Deservingly so. It's March Madness time. But I got to give props to the Bucks. Give it to John Horst. Kuzma looks good. I like that Kevin Porter trade. Early returns are looking good for the Bucks. Maybe they'll make a little run. We'll see. But it's March Madness, Grant. Badgers, Marquette. Can't wait. Let's go, baby.
All right, I'm down and on board with all of that, Tony. That's a good call. Good luck with your Lenten journey. I'm just going to bring something up. I don't mean anything by it. This is not me trying to be a hot take incendiary radio guy. I have plenty to talk about with the Packers tonight. I don't need to bring this up. Oh, great. You're just stirring things up for content. No, I don't need to. Not tonight. In a couple weeks, maybe, but not right now. I don't need to right now. Is there anything to be gleaned from the fact that the Bucks are on this great winning streak and look like a pretty good team? And this thing kind of began with Bobby Portis being suspended. Like, Bobby Portis hasn't played in any of these games. Is there anything there? And I'm not like, I don't really feel that strongly about Bobby Portis. There is a contingent on Twitter of Bucks fans who do nothing but call Brook Lopez the R word and complain about how Bobby Portis is on the team. And these people are children. I think there are some reasonable frustrations to be had with Bobby Portis, but like, people talk about him like he's a war criminal. I don't know, man. On a Tuesday night in January when you're playing a game in Charlotte, like, I guess I'm not going to lose sleep over the center that takes some inefficient post-ups. Like, you got to get through the season somehow. Not a perfect player. And sometimes he gets out over his skis when it comes to his role and his involvement. And certainly not the most efficient player. But I do wonder, you know, this really good stretch of it. Maybe it's just that they came back rested after the All-Star break, and this was like the actual start of their season. Could be. But Bobby Portis also hasn't been on the court for a lot of these games. So what am I supposed to do with that? I'm not sure. This is why I ask. Again, I'm not trying to stir up anything. Bobby in Menominee says the answer is Jordy. Greg Jennings was barely 6 foot, 200 pounds. Yeah, but Greg Jennings was physically a stud. Jordy, I don't know how to. Jordy was white. He didn't athletically pop off the screen at anyone. He looked like a farm boy. So yeah, his physical traits were great. They haven't had anyone probably since Javon Walker. That's a good pull by Tony, who looks like DK Metcalf. Jermichael Finley, but he was tight end. You know what I mean? Johnny Driftle says, I can't name one organization that fell apart from a bad trade. Watson, Browns were trash well before the trade. Yeah, the Watson thing, you gave up all your first round picks and then gave out like the worst contract in NFL history. If the Packers are going to pay DK Metcalf $300 million, okay, well, yeah, then maybe I might be out on it. But if they're going to bring him in and give him a contract requisite with his production and his skill level and his position with the appropriate amount of guaranteed money, allocated the way that a contract normally allocates money, then fine. Even if he's not all that great, they still have a couple wide receivers and a tight end that I love. They're good at the O-line thing, and they got a lot of talent on defense. oh, their defense, you guys, their defense was good last year. Their defense was the better unit down the stretch, especially. Their defense was better than the offense late in the season. Like, I don't know. I like their defense a lot. Ryan Wood earlier today on Bill's show talked about, like, I'm actually not that worried about corner. Everyone's treating corner like it's this big need. I don't know that corner is a dire need because it didn't really hurt him last year. I just think they need to throw a couple draft picks at that position because they got to get younger and got to build a little bit of a base because Nixon is older. I'm not saying he's ancient, but he's older. And, you know, they just need a little bit of an invigoration of younger talent, of youth at that position. But I think their defense, while they could stand to gain from adding an edge rusher or a linebacker, like, sure, but people talk about the Packers defense like it was a train wreck. No, it wasn't the best defense in football, but it was pretty darn good, and it was certainly more consistent and performed at a higher level in the biggest games that mattered at the end of the year. They performed better than the offense did. We'll take a couple of minutes. We'll take a break, come back. I'll make sure that everyone's got their thoughts in on the DK Metcalf situation, and then we'll get to Jesse Temple. He'll join us next to talk Badgers as well. A lot more of the Wisco Sports Show coming up.
This is the Wisco Sports Show with Grant Bills on the Wisconsin Sports Zone Radio Network.
The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 5 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 4 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 3 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 2 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 1 minute. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 30 seconds.
Wisco Sports Show. Twitter at Wisco Grant. Cheddarballs tweets in, says, last stud wide receiver for Green Bay that physically resembled DK Metcalf? Probably Sterling Sharp. Yeah, that's probably pretty close to accurate. I mean, we're going back before I can remember some of these guys. Or in the case of Sterling Sharp, like before I was alive. Javon Walker might be another example. Forget how he looks. He's the skill set that they need. We got time to sneak in a call here before we get to Jesse Temple. We're going to talk Badgers in just a minute. 608-321-1670. Wisco Sports Show. Who's this?
Hey, Grant. This is Squeeze from Milwaukee. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing good, Squeeze. What about you?
Living the dream. Hey, I agree with Ryan Wood. I think that they need to focus on defensive tackle. This class is absolutely loaded. They are young. They got, I think, like 3 guys that aren't going to be 21 draft night that have RAS of 9+.
Yeah.
Mold that, work with it, dive in. And if we don't get Josh Myers back, are you comfortable with what they have for options at center or guard? We saw what happened with Telfort and Glover when they had to be called into action during the playoff game. I think we're set at tackle. I'll hang up and listen. Thank you.
Those are all really good points. I will play that Ryan Wood clip for you at the end of the show. I'll go and find that. I want to get Jesse, because if I don't start it on time, then it's just all going to fit in the remaining 22 minutes of the show. I got to take a break. You don't care. It doesn't matter. But I will find that clip of Ryan Wood basically saying, I don't think corner is that big of a need. Everyone's talking about corner. I think they should throw a pick or 2 at corner, but I would rather try to beef up and try to find a stud interior defensive lineman. I agree completely. That's a great point by Squeeze. Excellent point. Jesse Temple, The Athletic. Let's talk a little Badgers, and then we can circle back to that comment, and I'll get that audio from Ryan Wood very end of the show. Jesse Temple is here making his weekly visit to talk Badgers, and he's got a story. He talked with Wisconsin's conditioning coach, strength and conditioning coach, Brady Collins, and I have a question about that relates actually back to the Combine, something that Hunter Wohler said in Indy last week. But I want to start with basketball because they lost at the Breslin Center on Sunday, and they didn't hit any threes. So, Jesse, when you watched that game, it felt big. It felt entertaining. Like those are the types of games we want this time of year. Was that a one-off? Was that an outlier game? Or was that, a game that you watched and thought, ooh, that's kind of the worst nightmare for this team and something that I would be concerned about happening again moving forward?
It's all of those things. This is a team that is attempting more 3-pointers than any Badgers team in program history, 27 plus a game, and also making more at 10 plus. So this is what the Badgers are built on this season. They're going to keep taking threes. But if you project ahead and say, well, what could derail Wisconsin's NCAA tournament chances? One of those things would be not being able to hit any threes if you're going to take that many and you're going to be so reliant from the perimeter. I do think, to add to what you were saying, Grant, it was an outlier to what we've seen so far. You're going to have to play 100 games, and 99 of those games, you will not have John Blackwell, John Tonje, and Kamari McGee combined to go 1 for 19 from 3. So it's all of those things, but you just did it at Michigan State, a team that is one of the better teams, obviously, in the Big Ten and in the country, and you're going to be trying to beat teams like that when you get into the NCAA tournament.
We've talked, and I've talked about this with Zach too, defenses that push the Badgers out, defend them really aggressively, far beyond the arc, and kind of get them out of sorts. I didn't gather that that's what got the Badgers off kilter. There was some good pressure. Michigan State's obviously an excellent defensive team, but to me, I thought they got a lot of good shots and just bricked them. Did you think there was something that Michigan State did or something that other teams could replicate, or did you think it was truly just a day where the shots wouldn't fall?
Well, it doesn't help when you go on the road and play at a place like that. It's a very difficult environment. And, people say that there's two certainties in life, death and taxes. But I would add Tom Izzo's Michigan State teams being ready to make a run in the postseason as the third, almost guaranteed annually. So it's not an easy place to play. I think Michigan State had lost, one game there all year. So you got to consider that. But they're going to keep trying to get good looks. And I remember Bo Ryan saying this, you can't coach them into making them. You just need to keep moving the ball and taking them.
You can't yell shots into the basket. I think Greg Gard has talked about that at one point in time, or maybe that's something Zach said. It all starts to run together over the years, but obviously a lot of parallels between Coach Bo Ryan and Coach Greg Gard. The scary thing is all of it coming together in one game. I think that the hope moving forward is even if they have a bad shooting performance, Tanjay is going to be able to get to the rim and hit free throws, or he's going to be able to hit some mid-range jumpers. Like truly none of the different ways that the Badgers have scored in one game or in one games, none of it was working on Sunday. So hopefully it's out of their system. Minnesota tonight and then Penn State. Are you concerned that maybe one of these bottom teams in the Big Ten gets them? I know Minnesota's played a lot better of late, but Penn State's at the bottom of the conference. How do you look at this last week of the season?
The Minnesota game would be a greater concern. I think they've got a winning record over their last dozen games or something like that. So they are capable of beating Wisconsin. But I would also say that if the Badgers are to be believed as a 2 or a 3 seed in the tournament, in the NCAA tournament, you got to win these 2 games. These are 2 of the worst teams in the league. And so I'm not concerned yet. Wisconsin generally has beaten the teams it is supposed to beat all season long. And if they want to position themselves well here for this postseason, you got to win these 2.
Yeah. And I feel better knowing what happened last week. They lose to Oregon and then they bounce back against Washington. Washington's a lesser team than Minnesota, and going to the Twin Cities, that's a place that the Badgers have had to kind of scratch and claw to win, right? They've held on to win the last couple times they've been up there by a possession or 2, but I like the way that they responded last week. So that keeps my hopes high that they'll be able to take care of business this week. Jesse Temple is here. Some Badgers football news today. Let's cover a housekeeping item. You might not have a lot to say about this. RJ, my coworker who attends all these Badger games, was not happy with this, but they moved up the Miami, Ohio game to a Thursday night on August 28th. Can you tell me anything about that? How will that be received? Just give me any and all thoughts you have on that little news item.
Well, it will be a short segment of the segment because I don't have many thoughts at all. I'll be there no matter when they play. Usually a lot of these openers end up on Friday night, so I'm not surprised that the date got moved. I'm a little surprised that it's now on a Thursday. For fans who want to make a weekend of Labor Day, that might make it a little bit more challenging. I suppose the upside here from a national perspective is that all eyes, or however many eyes care about college football and specifically a Wisconsin-Miami, Ohio game, will be on this game. But I have very few thoughts. They're going to play it, and some people will be mad, and others will care and go.
RJ sent this to me on Twitter today, and I said, RJ, he had like an emoji with a palm to forehead because he attends all these games, and he has forever. And I'm like, RJ, I just don't really care all that much. It does suck that it's a long weekend, though, so if people want to do the whole weekend in Madison, it's one more day, I guess. Hopefully, if you're coming to a game, you have a little time to burn, and right, it's not the end of the world. But I just thought maybe you'd have some thoughts on that. So you have a story with Brady Collins. I thought it was interesting last week. Hunter Wohler's talking with the media at the Combine, and he answered a couple questions about Wisconsin and the program and the state of the program. He mentioned Luke Fickell. He had a great staff. And actually, the one coach, if I remember correctly, that he shouted out was Coach Brady, the strength and conditioning coach. So that stuck with me. That was a choice that he made. One coach that came to mind. You have a story talking with him this week. So talk about maybe why Hunter was moved to mention this coach's name, and then some of the things that you discussed with Brady Collins for your story.
Yeah, I met with Brady in his office for over an hour last week, and obviously he spends as much time as anybody on staff with these football players because he's the one shaping their physiques and getting them ready to go for the season, certainly during this 8-week stretch before spring practice starts. And, it's interesting because he came in with as much hype as anybody other than Luke Fickell because of what they accomplished together at Cincinnati. And the results the last 2 seasons haven't met anybody's expectations, including him. And so I wanted to get his perspective on what he's learned here in 2 years and maybe what he's doing a little bit differently this year. It's not so much about making wholesale changes to his strength and conditioning program. Just because Wisconsin went 5-7 doesn't mean he's going to overhaul what he's spent a decade working on. But there is something to be said for trying to generate a level of connectivity and togetherness. And some people may roll their eyes at that, and it does sound cliche. But when you're in a transient college football world where there's going to be at least 41 new scholarship players this year, you have to figure out how to get these guys to care about one another And if that means manufacturing it, so be it. But like, he asked people when they're out of the football facility to send photos of the guys together, just because Brady wanted to know about it. And he schedules workout groups. So like the 15 early enrollees can work with a veteran at their position. He did this last Friday at 6 a.m. There's a lot of those kinds of situations to try to generate buy-in. And the hope is that, as Brady says, it's the littlest of things that can make the biggest of differences. So I know the guys really like him. I've heard people complain, well, look what happened the last 5 games of the season. They fell apart. The defense was physically outclassed. And certainly all that has to fall on the coaching staff. But at the same time, I think he's doing everything he can. You also need the players in the scheme.
Yeah, or you need players who are big enough, right, to avoid being run over by, the rushing attack of Iowa or, some of those other games down the stretch. You said the word manufacture, right? Because these guys often are showing up on campus transfers or guys who haven't known each other for years and years, haven't come up through the ranks together. So you have to manufacture that camaraderie. Do you think that's something that college football coaches, not just Coach Brady, but anybody that you've talked to and observed, that's got to be something on the front of the mind of some of these coaches? How do we microwave? Let's use that word. How do we microwave the process of getting these guys to feel like they've been at it in the trenches for years together, even though that hasn't been the case in the recent state of college football?
I've said before, having covered Wisconsin for a long time now, one of Wisconsin's greatest advantages over the years was the ability to develop people over time, so that if you weren't the best player as a freshman or you were a walk-on 3 or 4 years down the road, you'd be every bit as good as any Big Ten player in the country. And now you just don't have that luxury. And that speaks to the greater challenge of college football as a whole and the transfer portal and all that stuff. But it's also about this level of togetherness, because you're not going to have guys for 4 years. You might not even have them for 2 if they just see what happens in 1 year. So because you're going to have roster turnover and 40 plus this offseason, it's not going to be different moving forward. I mean, that's just for early enrollees, the 41 plus. I think it's all the freshmen and the transfers, but it doesn't include potential spring portal additions. And so you have no choice but to figure out ways to get these guys together, whether it's lifting, whether it's outside the building. But again, it goes back to how much talent do you have? And I think that's been an issue for Wisconsin as well.
Yeah, you can try to build all the camaraderie you want. If you don't have the right players or the right scheme or fit or talent or anything, it's only going to matter so much. I was reading your mailbag. I wanted to go back to this because I only saw this last week. So you took questions from Badgers fans. You're a man of the people, Jesse. I've always known that about you, even before we started doing hits together. And a question asker in this mailbag asked about expectations, because Fickle has mentioned, the expectations weren't exactly on the same page when Longo got to town. So this question asker is like, well, how could that be different with Coach Grimes now running the offense? Fickle's also mentioned that there was a little delusion, right? There was a little entitlement. Do you think the mindset of the coaching staff will be more aligned, but do you think the mindset will also be more realistic and better aligned with what actually needs to be accomplished this year? Talk about that a little bit to wrap up.
Yeah, this goes back to a conversation that I had with Luke a couple weeks ago for a story that ran last week on The Athletic, where he referenced arrogance and delusion as 2 things that have been problematic the last couple of years. And he also put that on himself because he thought they'd come in here and they were the best in the Big Ten West. But I do think, and he talked about this offseason, it's been tremendously important for him to be as realistic and honest with this team as possible. He's not trying to pump them up to be something they're not. They know what happened last season. They lost to the last 3 West Division teams they played and got embarrassed in all 3 of those games. And so you can't say, well, we're the best in the Big Ten West, or we want to get to that next level when you can't even beat those teams. So, yeah, I think there's a new level of honesty. And again, some of this stuff might sound like coach speak, and people might say, well, who cares? Because all that really matters are the results on the field. But you do have to start with a level of honesty and transparency, because Luke said if you can't be really honest with each other, then it's going to be difficult to move forward.
And I just thought that was because that's a theme that I've seen pop up in some of your reporting, and it's something that you and Zach have talked about on the camp in the swing as well. Jesse, I appreciate your time. Always nice to catch up. Do we have anything that we should watch for at The Athletic that you're working on the next couple of days or the next week or so?
Well, spring practice starts in a week. Hard to believe. So first couple practices are going to be open. I'll have reporting from everything that I see with another new Badgers team.
Awesome. Well, and doesn't get any easier. It's all these new faces and transfers, and that's the current state of college football. So I appreciate your time, Jesse. Thank you.
Thanks, Grant.
This is the Wisco Sports Show with Grant Bills on the Wisconsin Sports Zone Radio Network.
The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 3 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 2 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 1 minute. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 30 seconds.
The one position to me, Bill, and I am all alone out here. I am standing on a limb that is really by myself. But the one position to me that I'm not saying it's not a need, but it's not nearly as high as a need as I've seen from everywhere else is quarterback. They need numbers there. Brian Gutekunst said after the season that they need numbers. But I think that Brian Gutekunst sees two primary factors other than they have a decent triumvirate right now with Keyshawn Nixon, Carrington Balancing on the outside. Javon Bullard, safety next to his name on the roster, should only be considered a nickel cornerback from here on out. Evan Williams is the starting safety next to Xavier McKinney. Doesn't mean that Javon Bullard can't play safety. He's your starting slot corner going into next season. They need to add the depth from there, but the two primary factors, one, the tutelage of Jeff Hafley. These were the same corners of 2023 under Joe Barry that allowed a perfect passer rating to Baker Mayfield, that allowed Bryce Young to look like a competent starting quarterback in the NFL as a rookie. Same group, totally, it could not be more opposite play in 2024 under Jeff Hafley. The Jeff Hafley effect was very, very evident when it came to this quarterback group and how much better they played, how well they played, how Keyshawn Nixon found a home on the perimeter, never felt comfortable in the slot. The other, the safety group that we keep talking about, the way that they bolster the coverage on the back end takes so much pressure off those three corners. They need depth there, but at the end of the day, it would not surprise me if they're walking into 2025 with Keyshawn Nixon, Carrington Valentine as your perimeter starters, Javon Bullard as your slot guy, and then bring in some depth.
That's Ryan Wood. We had a caller, what was that, Squeeze in Madison? Mentioned that comment from the Bill Michaels show earlier today. I don't think he's wrong. I agree with him. And you need to throw numbers at the position. because at some point you need a younger developing player at that position. But I don't know that they go into this draft with cornerback being the number one need. Like I kind of thought maybe it was going into last season, or kind of assumed as this last season was winding down. I'm like, okay, well then this year, if not last year, then this year will be the year that they go cornerback heavy. They actually survived just fine last year for the most part. If they have a pass rush, oh my God. You know what I mean? Like, I think I would prioritize defensive line. And if you can go out, like, I talked with Andy on Pack-A-Day on Sunday night for the Monday pod this week about the potential of a DJ Reed signing, corner from the Jets. I'm like, I'd rather spend that money 2 or 3 different ways. I think they're fine at corner. They're not awesome, but they're fine. And if you can throw a 3rd round or a 4th round pick at a corner, and that guy can contribute and develop and be a fine or nice rotational player, I think you might be okay. You know what I mean? I would rather beef up the pass rush. I'd rather add a veteran there along the defensive line or outside linebacker, edge rusher, defensive end, whatever, 4-3-3-4. It's just, a difference in language. Or, on the offensive side, if you can bring in DK Metcalf or Devontae Adams or a bucket getter on the offensive side of the ball, I'd rather do that. All of that before corner, especially if it's going to cost a pile of money to get a guy like DJ Reed. No thanks. I'll pass. Draft a guy, throw him in there. Bobby Menominee says pre-ACL Jordy was the big play threat that would cut and run faster than any of the defenders. Yeah, we're kind of kicking around Packers historical comps, at least for the past 20 or 30 years, for guys like if they were to go get DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf, by the way, if you're just catching the last little bit of the show, maybe you tuned in while Jesse was talking. We learned today that he's officially requested a trade from Seattle. That doesn't mean that he'll get traded. I think the odds are probably a lot stronger that he will get moved. Things could always work out. Maybe Seattle throws a bunch of money at him, but I think the reason they've gotten to this point and the reason that he's requesting a trade is because Seattle hasn't really wanted to pay him. And I think the reasons that Seattle doesn't want to pay him are probably good reasons. Like, is that what's going to take him over the top? Is that what's going to take him from this middling, borderline contending team to a team that can ascend to Super Bowl contention? Probably not. So I think it's probably best for both parties for a divorce, especially if Seattle can get something back. If they can get a 2nd round pick or a 3rd round pick from the Packers and Romeo Doubs, it's a pretty good haul, considering Deebo Samuel, who is a little bit older, of course, but Deebo also doesn't need a new contract. DK Metcalf's going to need a new contract right away. So if you can get a player like Doubs who can come in and be a legitimate player I'm not saying he's a star. I think I'm appropriately valuing Romeo Doubs. I'm not saying he's a star, but he's very similar to the players that Seattle received in the Russell Wilson deal. Shelby Harris, Drew Lock is quarterback, so set that one aside. But Noah Fant, oh my God, Noah Fant is the Romeo Doubs of tight ends. Romeo Doubs might even be a little bit better relative to the rest of his position than Noah Fant was. So I think the Packers have the pieces and the motivation and the reason to get it done. I mean, look at how he fit. He's the exact type of player that they look for in the draft. And now he's ready-made, proven player at age 27. We'll talk more about this tomorrow. Enjoy the Badger game tonight. That's where we will begin tomorrow night at 4. I'll talk to you then.